and with that also the mental health, in the sense that I had so much anxiety, and alcohol was really becoming a big problem for me. And I can remember even writing my will, my testament, and so on, because I really thought that, I will not be able to turn this around. And I could see that my health was deteriorating.
Do you consider yourself a high achiever? Smart, driven, highly successful? I am so excited to have you. My name is Julia Arndt, and I'm the host of the Stress Podcast. I will help you develop your stress resilience the same way you've developed your workplace superpowers. Learn peak performance tools to thrive at work and in your personal life. Let's get started. Hi everyone, and welcome back to the Stressed Podcast. My name is Julia Arndt, and I'm here today with our next podcast guest, who is Nick Jonsson. Hey Nick, how are you doing today?
I'm doing great, Julia. Thank you so much for hosting me.
Yes, it's my pleasure. I'm so excited to have a chat with you today, and so excited to share some of your expertise with the world today. Nick, you know already what's coming. There's 3 questions that I always ask my podcast guests at the beginning of every show. And the questions are, where are you located currently? What time is it? And what have you been up to this morning before jumping on the podcast?
Well, Julia, in this post-COVID world, I travel more. I can work from more places in the world. So right now, actually, I'm in Sweden. But if I'm looking at my time or the clock here, by the way, on my laptop, it says 11 p.m., which is Singapore time, because I'm more working towards Southeast Asia. But in Sweden, it's 5 p.m. It's a early summer evening, so it's quite nice. And today I was working. I'm working for Singapore, so I was up local time around 4 a.m. in Sweden when it's 10 a.m. in Singapore. So I start my day early, finishing lunchtime, and then I've been swimming this afternoon. And now I'm looking forward to speaking with you and your guests.
Very cool. That sounds lovely. A swim in one of the lakes in Sweden, I assume?
Not yet. It's about, if you talk degrees, it's about 11, 12 degrees, which is a bit chilly still. So I'm still indoors, but maybe in 2-3 weeks it will warm up enough to get in the ocean.
In the ocean, very nice. Nick, tell us a little bit more about you and what you do today and how you came to do what you do today.
Yeah, so I was born in Sweden, educated in Australia, and then I worked in Southeast Asia in the last 20 years, and mainly working my way up in the corporate ladder, general manager, managing director of big multinationals, running their offices in Asia, and so on. These days, though, my life has changed. I have left the corporate world, and instead I'm running an organization where we have confidential peer groups for either senior executives or for entrepreneurs and business owners. So in these peer groups, they can discuss the work-related challenges they have, the pressures they have, learn from each other and share the knowledge there. So that's what we do today, and I have about 800 members, most of them the CEOs or business owners there in Southeast Asia.
Really interesting. How long have you been doing that?
Almost 8 years now, and the focus is mainly so far is on Singapore, Indonesia, and Malaysia in Southeast Asia.
Very cool. And so tell us a little bit more of how you came to do that. So what made you decide to leave the corporate world and start your own business?
Yeah, so this business has been around. It's a franchise model that was started 30 years ago in Europe and in Denmark. It's called EGN. So I joined the franchise in the market where I knew. And why leaving the corporate world? Well, I have to say that I went through a personal crisis also, which transitioned me across here. I felt a bit isolated in the workplace. I felt I achieved a lot and I got the promotions, I got the salary that I wanted. But in the end, I wasn't happy. It was something missing, and I wanted to look for something else. And that led me also to hit my own rock bottom. I gained weight. I exchanged a healthy diet for fast food and so on. And I exchanged also, healthy drinks with alcohol. So that's really propelled me into making something different of my life.
Mm-hmm. Okay. And so take us a little bit back in that space where you were at, because I know that making that decision and obviously having the awareness of I'm actually eating shitty foods and I'm actually not really happy. How how was that for you, and when did you realize that that's actually not the way you want to live?
So it was a very slow, gradual change. Lasted for 2, 3 years. When
Hmm.
if I used to go to the gym after work or used to cycle, then maybe once a week or twice a week, I stopped that habit and instead I went to the bar.
Hmm.
So it was just a gradual change. It's like a scale almost, and
Hmm.
eventually though you just start thinking, well, I gained weight anyway. I don't really have the fitness. Why bother? And then the
Hmm.
gym membership lapse, and then you just end up in bad habits. And before you know it, bad habits turn into addictions, and
Hmm.
addictions can then that they are running your life, which is what happened in my life. And alcohol was the one that got me, and I just couldn't break the pattern eventually. And then all my friends and my life was around meeting friends in the bar, going for restaurants, uh,
Hmm.
liking wines, having good wine collections, joining wine tastings, and all the hobbies and everything you do are around those things. Then you justify to yourself the addiction, and perhaps living in your own lies, which was where I ended up in the end.
Hmm. And at the same time at work, did that affect how you were working? Did that affect your success, or were you still very successful?
So I unfortunately was laid off twice. One was
Mm.
because I didn't really know how to handle relationships, and I had three bosses in that job, and the third one we didn't really get along. And looking back, I could have handled it better. The second time I was laid off, it was a merger and acquisition, so I was unlucky along with 300 others,
Mhm.
and I wasn't to blame, but this made me very insecure. I felt very
Mm.
insecure in the corporate world. My next job, I was so anxious. I remember working the first 6 months towards the probation, every day thinking, will I pass it? Will I not? And even when I passed the probation, after that, I was always looking around me, being worried, maybe I will be
Mhm.
let go again. And
Mm.
that was the feeling of, that feeling that I'm not in charge of this. I'm not in control of this. The company can pull the plug on me any day. And
Mhm.
especially when you live away as an expat then, and your whole life depends on it, the housing, your work permit, your status, even being in the country,
Totally. Yeah.
it's related to that. So it's so much and I just couldn't deal with all those uncertainties. And that's why I wanted to be in charge of my own life. So that's why eventually I had to make the transition.
Hmm. Hmm. And was there like when you were talking about the rock bottom, what was there like a specific thing that happened to you where you were like, okay, now I really need to make a change?
Yeah, so at that time, I lost my physical health, and with that, also the mental health, in the sense that I had so much anxiety, and alcohol was really becoming a big problem for me. And I can remember even writing my will, my testament, and so on, because I really thought that, I will not be
Mm.
able to turn this around. And I could see that my health was deteriorating. My left foot was swollen like an elephant foot at the time. I went to see doctors. They didn't even know what it was. It was only when I saw a psychologist who said that this is a psychosomatic illness, which
Mm.
basically means that if you have so much anxiety inside you, it starts to show up on the outside of your body. And that
Mhm.
scared me, and that's really when I thought that, I have to seek help here. And while I went to the doctor, so I didn't tell them about what I felt mentally. I think most people are quite comfortable going to the doctor. If we break an arm, we say, yeah, I broke my arm. And even me with a foot, I said it's swollen and I had some problems. And we're talking about, did I fall over or something? We didn't talk
Mhm.
about anxiety at the first instance. So that was
Mhm.
only later on. And at that time, it was I just got remarried, and I decided to tell my new wife how I felt internally, and that was the start, basically, of my recovery.
Mm. Very cool. Did you know at the time that it was anxiety?
I think it was a combination on things. I didn't. When you're so caught in it, you don't understand what's going on really. But
Right.
uh, when I got help, I mean, I was in a deep depression. I had anxiety, and anything would make me, highly stressed. Even
Mhm.
something small would make me stirred up and stressed, just
Mhm.
because I didn't have the physical health and I didn't have any mental health. If I would have even a cup of coffee, I would start shaking, and that would
Mhm.
send me off. So that's how sensitive I was.
Yeah, I can totally relate. That's why I'm asking you the question, because when I experienced my burnout in 2018, I had very high anxiety, but I didn't know what it was. I just knew the feeling kind of. And then when my doctor told me I had anxiety, that was kind of the first time where I actually was able to put kind of a name to the feeling that I was experiencing. That's why I was asking, because I feel
Mm,
like, once you kind of go through it, as you were saying, it's such a gradual process, and you have all of these experiences and you don't really know how to label them.
mm.
It's really hard also to help yourself. So I think it's really important to highlight, you don't always know that it's anxiety, sometimes it's just kind of the way of how you feel, and knowing that you just don't really feel like yourself anymore. Um, you were saying as well, so wait, let me take a step back. So you were saying, okay, so you had all of these, you felt not like yourself anymore, and you talked with your wife about it, and then was that then pretty shortly after that you decided to quit your job?
So at this stage, I was actually already in my current job. I just had
Mhm.
not told people, and I managed to hold it together. I did decently well, but I had not told many people. I told my wife. She brought me to a doctor, where she helped me to share my story. I would not have told it, but she told the doctor what I had told her, and
Mhm.
then after that, she brought me to a friend who also had some issues before, and this person brought me to an anonymous 12-step recovery program where I got support. So within 24 hours, my story was out there in a confidential setting, but I was
Right.
fully supported. People were willing to help, and that was the game changer for me.
Yeah, wow. Were you really relieved at the time that you finally opened up to your wife, or how was that feeling?
Yeah, I mean, that was the relief. And every time you share something about this kind of trauma, you're sort of, recovering yourself a little bit and
Hmm.
coming back again. So
Hmm.
even talking with you today, Julia, despite this is, 5+ years ago, you are helping me to get over this as well. And I think that's something we just need to keep talking about it and take away the pain and use it for our strengths. Because if someone else is going through or even have a small sense of these emotions, it's
Hmm.
about what can we learn from this so we don't have to go to the rock bottom where I was.
Right. And what would you say to people when they would ask you, how do you not get to that rock bottom?
It's about practicing asking for help and
Mm.
grabbing it, before it goes so deep, before you're so isolated, before it is so bad. There's so much help and support from coaches, mentors, and anonymous support programs, volunteers who are there to help and willing to listen and who want to help and want to support. But people, we're just naturally so scared from asking for help, and that is where the game changer is.
Yeah, yeah, I love that. Nick, you also wrote a book called Executive Loneliness, and I want to talk with you a little bit more about that topic today. How did you get to decide to talk or to write about that in particular?
Yeah, so 1 year into my recovery, I was feeling great. I mean, I was doing basically daily work in the recovery group that I was part of and so on, but I had still not shared my story with the world. But what happened then was a good friend of mine, a senior executive, successful entrepreneur, he died of suicide in Singapore. And that really hit me because I realized,
Mhm.
I was going down and I could perhaps have ended up there one day. I was not
Mm.
suicidal, but I really, really thought that my life was over because my body was breaking down, and it probably would not have been too long before I would have those thoughts as well. So that was the eye opener for me, and I
Mm.
immediately called my friend's brother and asked what I could do. And I asked for the permission to talk about it, and he said, "Do that. Simon would have loved that." So with that, I made a LinkedIn post with a video, and I set up a charity fund to raise funds and to raise awareness for suicide prevention. And
Mhm.
this went viral. So within 24 hours, TV stations, radio, newspapers, and people from all over the world wrote to me and cheering on me and donating money and so on to the cause. And that's when I realized, I was suddenly
Wow.
talking about something that no one really wanted to talk about. And that was the start then of writing this book.
Wow. I'm just getting the chills as you're explaining that. That's incredible. And so Can you tell us a little bit more about how you would define, or how do you know what executive loneliness is? I think you said earlier as well, which I thought was really interesting. You said you felt very isolated. You were really successful and you were climbing the ladder and you got the promotions and the salary increases, but you felt really isolated. Can you tell us more about that?
Yeah, as the saying goes, it's lonely at the top. It really is like that
Mm.
because if you are working as a managing director, then you might not have anyone in your office at your level. But if you are a senior manager in the department, maybe there's 50 people in other departments with your title. You can go for a lunch, you can talk about work at that level. But as a senior executive, it can also be a lot of things you have to keep confidential and so on. So yes, it can be lonely at the top, but then the culture that the leader sets, if they're keeping the problems and the challenges to themselves, which too many times we do, I did it too much,
Mm.
then you're creating that culture in the company where no one really shares openly. And I worked in a few of these organizations, and because everyone else was keeping it to themselves, my bosses, therefore I kept it to myself and I didn't
Mm.
share much with my team. And that's a
Mm.
very, very lonely place to be, because when you then are faced with a challenge, you don't really have anyone to talk to. And that is the isolation I was talking about. And through my work now, then I had been at this stage in many meetings, and I heard from all the senior executives, or many of them at least, and also the entrepreneurs, that they felt also isolated many times.
Hmm. And was that kind of the the groundwork for the book, or did you go like, is that all those kind of the interviews that you were doing for the book, or how did you create that?
Yeah, so that was the groundwork, and also the journalists all did also the legwork
Mm.
for me. They asked me all the
Nice.
questions and so on, and then I could repackage that, and I took those questions also to the people of the book. I surveyed executives and entrepreneurs. I also did interviews of executives, and it's basically the all the findings of this is what's in the book, and more
Mm.
importantly, then also my learnings and other learnings, how to break through and how to go through it as well, was covered in the book.
Right. Would you say that executive loneliness shows itself a lot in burnout, addictions? I don't know what else, but are those kind of usually the tendencies that then executives have when they feel isolated and lonely?
Yeah, certainly it's all linked, right? I mean, if you're not
Hmm.
feeling well, you're feeling isolated, and if you don't have the connection, then alcohol, for example, is numbing that, or any drugs, or social media, or any escape we can find
Hmm.
in this world. There's so many of them. That's all interlinked.
Right. W- So when if I'm kind of trying to put myself into the shoes now of an executive, right? So I'm running this like very successful maybe organization or even company. I'm feeling there's things that I can't share. I feel very lonely. How do you get out of that?
Well, it comes really from practice, and I say we have to practice the vulnerability muscle.
Hmm.
And we might need a coach or a mentor, someone to help us with this. But it's
Hmm.
not only in the workplace. We can practice this with our friends. We can
Hmm.
practice this within our family. Uh, but to give you an example, I have a 14-year-old son, and I want him to be more open and more honest and more vulnerable than I was growing up. So when I talk to him now, I normally share something about my feelings, something that I'm going through. If I have something challenging and difficult, and I name it, I name the emotions and the feelings around that.
Mm.
And once I said that, I throw the question to him, how are you feeling? Because then I sort of have open up the conversation. I've shown that I can talk about my feelings, and that's okay to do that. And without
Mhm.
him then even thinking then about it, it will be natural for him to start talking about his feelings. And we can do that with our colleagues. If we're chatting to them, we can open up a little bit, be a little bit human and sharing. I mean, when everyone asks how's it going, and it's okay. Well, it's not always okay, and I think we need to
Right.
just practice to be a bit more honest.
Yeah, totally. I love the example as well with your son. That's really, really sweet. And I was just thinking one more question about that. How do you how do you coach others now to kind of do that, right? Because I still think, okay, I'm this like, super successful executive, and showing that vulnerability is really difficult. Or, where do you start then? When you would maybe even tell yourself, well, I've always been this way. I have a hard time sharing feelings. I'm just not that way, right? Um, w- do you think, for example, for you it was easier to speak to your wife, for example, because she was kind of removed a little bit from that executive world?
Well, it's always difficult to have this conversation, and who do we trust to have this conversation? I didn't grow up having these kind of open, honest conversations in my home. We were biting it together and pushing through, and that was also the school I had, at different workplaces. I was never encouraged by my bosses to open up, and they rather told me the opposite. Be careful, don't show off if you have a new mobile phone. And the company was making sure that every senior executive had the same car, the same brand, the same color, to make sure no one stood out. You were really asked to just lay low, keep it simple, and don't stand out, and don't talk too much, and don't open up too much about things, because people might start gossip and so on. And I remember even was asked, making sure we be careful what we post on social media about our life and so on. That's at least me working as an expat then in Southeast Asia. So, if that's how the workplace is asking you to behave, then who are we honest to? And in my case, yeah, I'm lucky that the pain was so big that I told my wife. Yeah, it was that moment when I decided to tell her. And that led then to the next thing. And now, though, I know that we need to have these safe places outside your workplace. We need to practice it, and it can be with a coach or a mentor, or it can be what I'm working with now, having these confidential peer groups. And while we don't discuss necessarily mental health there, it is work-related challenges. You are asked when you come to bring what's your number one work-related challenge now, then you get a chance to stand up and present that, and the whole group will help you. So you practice by speaking up. Maybe you have one or two slides presenting, this is my issue now, we have this conflict in my team, or we are expanding, and here is my strategy, can you give me some feedback? So then people really learn to open up. And yeah, and to summarize it, Julia, it can be a safe place outside your workplace if the culture internally is not there. You cannot change perhaps the culture of a whole company unless you're the owner of it or CEO.
Right. No, that's totally true. And I love actually that you're talking a little bit more about the groups. It's EGN, right? Is that correct?
Yes, that's right.
EGNs. How big are the groups when you're meeting?
So we basically have about 25 to 30 members in a group, and someone
Okay.
will always be unavailable, maybe for some travel or so on. But
Right.
we say that a good meeting is sort of 14 to 18 people.
Okay. And do you encourage people to talk about feelings as well when they present the slides about their work problems?
Not necessarily in there, but when I
Mm.
come to my recovery meetings, which I do, and I'm a volunteer for them, I go 4 or 5 times a week now to help other newcomers who come in with challenges, mainly addiction. Then, I mean, it's all about the feelings. It's all about the feelings, but not only negative feelings, but also gratitude feelings and so on.
Yeah. Yeah. How did your routines then change once you obviously, put yourself out there, you shared how you were feeling? You said it was kind of a year where it was like, you felt really miserable to you felt much better. What happened in that year? What kind of changes did you start to make?
I actually felt better every day. It really was a V-shaped recovery. It was
Mm.
absolutely marvelous. As soon as I removed the alcohol, and I got back into a good diet, started exercising slowly, got a coach, and I got these wearable devices who gave me a plan. I remember just
Nice.
starting to walk, like 3 kilometers, but we put a goal of running a half marathon again, because I was quite athletic before, and we
Hmm.
put that within 6 months. And after 1 year in recovery, I already completed a full Ironman
Wow.
event, which is a 3.8 kilometer swim, 180-kilometer bike, and then run a marathon at the end. So that's one year into my
Wow.
recovery.
Incredible. And so what would you So I am actually kind of curious to learn more about the EGNs. Can you tell us a little
Mm.
bit more about it? So it's really with regards to work challenges, right? It's not that you come there. I mean, it's probably also networking at the end of the day, right? Because you still meet people from different industries and so on. But tell us a little bit more about kind of why you are also so inspired to work and with them and to create that network of people in Southeast Asia.
Yeah, the best way to probably explain it is imagine you have mastermind groups or peer groups, as
Mm-hmm.
this is called when it's run and organized by company. So the whole point is to match either executives or entrepreneurs in a peer group of like-minded and at your seniority level. So if you are working for a big multinational company as a CEO, you want to have CEOs working for other companies, but not the competitors, because then you might not be open and vulnerable enough about your challenges.
Mm-hmm.
Then if we make everyone sign a non-disclosure agreement so that they should know that this is confidential.
Mm-hmm.
Then they meet 6 times a year for half a day, and we schedule these 1 year in advance so everyone can block them in the calendar because they are
Wow.
busy.
Right.
And then basically the members are the ones who put the topics what they want to discuss, and typically a 4 hour session then are divided in two parts. 2 hours is on a topic that they have agreed before that they're going to take a deep dive, and then we will bring in a facilitator, a moderator, perhaps a guest speaker who can discuss and explain about this. It can be future of work or AI or whatever it may be, and then they have a discussion about that. Then the other 2 hours is really what we call the advisory board, where they take turns to express themselves about the challenge they have. And then the rest of the group will ask clarifying questions. And
Mm-hmm.
after that, they will take some time, work in groups, and then you might get 3 or 4 groups presenting back to you what they think you should do. So you should leave that meeting, with a sheet of paper with different ideas, different suggestions to your
Mm-hmm.
problem. So in that sense, you're practicing then the vulnerability, you're getting some help, you're getting some support, and right on, Julia, what you said, it is networking, but it's networking by being vulnerable, networking by
Mm-hmm.
building real deep relationships, because we have a different connection when we are helping each other and we are being a bit vulnerable rather than selling to each other, which so often networking is
Totally.
about, sadly.
Yeah, totally. I love that. Yeah, and I'm kind of thinking as well, it's so powerful. I love that you addressed vulnerability multiple times because that's really something that I see as well, even in more like the modern tech companies where you think people are more vulnerable and where you think people talk more openly about what's going on. It's still the same culture because we are afraid to show ourselves from our true side because we think it will reflect negatively on our performance evaluation, for example, right? And or it's going to be used against us. So
Mm,
I definitely know that that's such an important topic and such an important tool to kind of have and to do. Um, yeah, I just love that. I think that's so powerful. Great. Nick, is there anything else that I haven't asked you yet that you think would be worth sharing?
Well, if you want, I can talk you through briefly the 5 steps that I developed on the book to overcome this executive loneliness. I made a very simple 5 step formula to that people,
Yes, I would
an
love
executive
that.
can take.
Please
Yeah?
share that with us. Yeah.
Yeah, so the first step is what I call taking stock.
Mm-hmm.
And what I mean with that is just like if you have a store or a shop, you would normally do a stock take. If it's not once a quarter, then maybe once a month, and you do a major one once a year, where you're really looking at the inventory and what you have and so on. But how often do we as humans do an honest stock take where we get
Mm-hmm.
a pen and paper or a spreadsheet where we write down all the issues, all the pain points we have, and then perhaps discuss through that with a coach, and really
Mm-hmm.
summarize it. So that's the first step to know what's there. And in my
Mm-hmm.
case, then I was overweight, I had alcohol addiction, there was many of the relationships that was broken. I had pain points thinking about my sister. We didn't have a good relationship at the time. I had to write down basically every single thing that could make me feel bad or that could trigger that I go for a drink or that I have an anxiety attack or something like that. So that's the first step.
Mm-hmm. Okay, great. What's next?
The next one is, and then once you have that list and sorted, sort of the most important one is asking for help. Then think of every line. Who can I get help for this? It might be some things you can help yourself with the use of, in search engine, something is basic. But what are
Mm,
the critical ones? Do you need a coach? Do you need a mentor? Do you need a doctor? Who do you need for everything? And
mm,
then basically the third one after that was getting healthy for me, and that is what I recommend. So on that list, you ask for help where it relates to your health. You need to get your physical health and mental health in shape
mm,
before you, for example, go out and do what is in step 4, fixing the relationships. So all your relationships with colleagues, friends, and so on, you can address them once you are feeling well internally. And with that, then the fourth step of the relationships meant that in the case of my sister, I had to go back to make amends. I had to apologize and for this incident. And as it happens in that case, she couldn't even remember it. She was just wondering why I wasn't avoiding her recently. And there,
mm,
boom, the relationship was fixed in 10 seconds. So many times we walk around carrying
mm.
the pain of some broken relationships, which can be fixed easily.
Right. Yeah, totally. I'll let you finish the fifth step first, but I do have a question. But let's hear the last one first.
Yeah, the fifth step is finding your purpose. So what I realize is once you then have, gone through this, you're feeling better, you're on your right path, then it's really about asking yourself, what is it that you can do? How can you play this forward? And in my case, it was clear. I now recovered. I was, really unwell and managed to get back into really, really feeling great. So now my purpose is really helping others to go through this, because there's still a lot of people out there who are suffering, and I want to be there for them.
Yeah, totally. That's so wonderful. And I'm very curious to talk with you more about that. My first question is, how does it happen that oftentimes we need to hit rock bottom? So how did it not happen maybe 6 months or 12 months earlier that you're like have because you're so successful, right? You're a super ambitious professional, you have so much success in your life. How does it happen that you don't have the realization so much earlier on to say, I'm actually not well and I need to get back into the routine, or I need to talk to someone or go to the gym or maybe hire, I don't know, a dietitian or nutritionist or personal trainer? How does that not happen earlier?
Well, I think that's a $1 million question, Julia. I mean, if you even think back at children, you're telling your child not to put the hand on the hot stove. They surely will. They
Right.
surely will do it, and they will burn themselves, and they will. That's the only time they will stop. And the question here then is, why do we as adults bring this behavior with us that we don't
Mm,
learn? Why can we not read a book about someone else who's
totally.
gone through this, right? We have to
Hmm.
feel that pain. We have to go through it ourselves, and that is the big challenge here. But what we can do at least is that life it comes with pain, it comes with happiness, and it comes with great feelings. But at least by talking about this, we can help people so they don't have to go
Hmm.
as deep. I mean, how deep does your rock bottom have to be? If you feel
Right.
isolated, do you have to pick up an addiction, or can
Hmm.
you sort it out before that?
Yeah, no, totally. It is totally the $1 million question, because I obviously work with so many people as well, right, that are having issues with anxiety and depression, and they're overworked themselves, but they have a hard time to get back out of that cycle. And one of the things that really resonated with me at the beginning of the interview today that you were saying was, it was a very gradual 2 to 3 year process of, oh, I just skipped gym once or twice a week because there was maybe some work engagements and things like that, right? And then it just kind of became more and more, and you don't realize it because it's such a slow, gradual process. And that was totally exactly what it was for me as well, without realizing, because in my head, at the time, even when I burned out and I was diagnosed with anxiety and depression by my doctor, I still thought I was a very healthy and active
Mm.
person. But I had actually not been working out anymore as regularly as I had before.
Yeah. Yeah, and what you're sharing, Julie, it's so many I hear now, especially about anxiety. There's so many layoffs every day. We hear about layoffs
Hmm.
in companies, and I mean, if you have a mortgage, you have children, you have so much
Totally.
responsibilities perhaps today working, and then you walking around with that. It's a lot to carry on everyone's shoulder, and the only way we can deal with this is being open about it, being name these feelings, talk
Mm-hmm.
about it, making sure we have those troopers around us, having that in the workplace if we can, and outside the workplace have some professional people who understand you in similar roles, and I also have your
Mm-hmm.
personal connections. That is what I learned, that those are the only ways we can overcome this.
Totally. And did you, now looking back at your situation, and I really appreciate actually that you're bringing up kind of that feeling of anxiety of losing the job again, because I think a lot of people are experiencing that at the moment.
Yes, I mean
Looking back at that situation, do you feel like, oh, I should have just talked to someone and that would have made me feel better? Or is there something else that people can do when they are finding themselves maybe in a similar space?
well, I think for a start, we need to build up all this, and again, as I said, practice this vulnerability muscle. When it's good times, when we are feeling good, we need to start talking about this on a day-to-day basis. So when something is really bad, the step for us to talk about that big issue that has happened is not so great because we're already almost there. That is, I think, the major issue in my case was that I didn't talk about it at all. I was suppressing all feelings. I didn't talk to anybody about it. So then when I really needed to talk about it and I was extremely sick, then it was even harder to talk about it. So I mean, look out for your friends, look out for your colleagues, and if you see that someone is changing behavior, gaining a lot of weight or losing a lot of weight, changing eating habits or sleeping patterns, and if someone is telling you that they cannot sleep and they have insomnia or they have issues, try to hear them out and try to listen to them, to the root cause, what's going on. There's obviously something there, and let's try to help each other to unpack that.
Yeah, totally. So are there more men in your groups than women? Or is it a mix?
It is here in Southeast Asia, and most of the senior jobs are still held by men, and but we are really encouraging women to come. About 28% of our members now are women, which is more than it is if you look at the boards. And the boards, for example, in Singapore is still 90% men. So we
Mm.
are far behind the rest of the world, but being
Yeah.
born in Sweden myself, where a country where gender equality has come a long way, I'm a good advocate for that as well.
Yeah, that's awesome. Yeah, because I assume that's total is an assumption, but I assume as well that generally maybe women do find it a little bit easier to talk about feelings and things that are going on, and men find it more difficult, which is also why I actually had a really interesting podcast interview a couple of weeks or maybe months ago now about suicide and about that it's mostly white males in their 40s, that like when you're looking at statistics, that are
Yes.
the people that are taking their lives. And I think that's such a it really shocked me, surprised me, because we had a couple of suicides here in Lake Tahoe, in that kind of range of white male, mid 40s. And it was really interesting to me, obviously, as I'm operating in this space, to learn more about that and to just really create more awareness of, oh, this is actually a real thing. And it doesn't just happen in Lake Tahoe, it happens all over the world, where people don't see any other way to cope with that than to take their lives.
Yes, absolutely. And this is exactly linked to the conversation we had. And
Mhm.
my research also found that women indeed tend to have some friends who they are a bit more vulnerable with, a bit more honest with than men. If I'm looking back at myself, I had great friends. We played golf, we went to the bar watching, sport, drinking beer, sharing, having a fantastic time. But we didn't speak about perhaps the things that really were pressing. I cannot remember
Mm.
telling anybody about the issues at work. I didn't want to bother them about that, and I thought that they probably don't understand anyway. So therefore, we just keep it, and the work is work. We leave to have a good time with our friends, and then the issues are back at work the next day, because we don't talk about it and we don't talk about these feelings. So that's unfortunately how it is. But when it comes to the peer groups, we find that the women tend to be more comfortable also in a woman-only group to speak up and be more open and honest, not so much in the mixed group. Yeah.
Yeah. Has that changed with your friends? Do you feel like you're more open now to talk with them about feelings too?
Surely, yeah. I mean, most of my friends have read my book where I'm explaining in my book when I hit rock bottom, the darkest moment of my life is described in detail in my book. So you can say that I'm an open book these days, and that means, of course, that my friends are very comfortable to come to me when they have issues, and they are all the time.
I can imagine, yeah.
And just by writing the book, I know of at least a few people whose life they claim were saved just by me interviewing them at the right time when they were going through some things in their life that could have turned the other way if it was not uncovered.
Wow, that's super, super powerful. Nick, thank you so much for sharing your story with us today and being so vulnerable. I really appreciate it that you shared so many insights. And how can people best reach out to you if they're curious to learn more about your work?
They can indeed look me up on LinkedIn, and it's Nick Jonsson, NickJonsson, or they can also find me easily on Amazon, where my book is Executive Loneliness. It's also now available as an audiobook on Audible.
Very cool. Very cool. I love Audible. Well, Nick, thank you so much for being here today. I really appreciated the vulnerable story and the help that I'm sure a lot of people benefit from. So I wish you a wonderful summer in Sweden, and then good luck back in the Southeast Asia, and maybe our paths will cross again.
Fantastic. Thank you so much for today, Julia. Have a great rest of the day.
Thank you so much. And for those of you that have been listening this podcast now and you feel like you know someone that could really benefit from the information and the content that we share today, make sure that you share this podcast with somebody that you know may maybe struggle with executive loneliness and may need to hear the words of wisdom from Nick. So thank you so much for listening, and I hope to hear you in the next podcast.